Hi guys, morning, afternoon, whatever it is. Okay, so this is part 5 and we're going with chapter 3. On the other side of the planet, a straw hut blazoned with mud stood in a small makeshift camp that had been makeshift for 7 years. World Vision had provided funds for wells to be constructed and a school constructed of mud the old-fashioned way. Volunteers from more uppity parts of the world who happened to be in the vicinity at the time gave their services willingly to help build the one-roomed school. Pranda, who at the time was only 3, like her brother in New York, of course she didn't know a bus from a reindeer, but her mother kept her informed of the kind fellows in another land that were brought their angels. She was one of 7 children, although the others had perished in various ways due to starvation or disease long before Pranda had grown to be a healthy 10-year-old. She had a picture of Trey and Calvin that she had stuck to the wall of their thatched hut and knew one day they would meet and hoped it would be sometime soon. The sun was seriously hot. Flies buzzed around the camp as Pranda's mother tended the daily chores. An older man that had survived long hardships in the group wandered over. He asked if Thalia needed water and said that he'd be glad to help her if she gave him a back rub later. Thalia knew that the back rub the old pervert wanted was not a back rub, but she also knew that he was harmless. She smiled at him, her beautiful white teeth talking in her absence, as she turned her head and looked away, as to say no. He laughed a giddy man's laugh, full of jollity, turned and went to get the water. He knew that one day she'd say yes, and a penny a day is worth a pound in the end. His father used to tell him, and he'd certainly pound her, he thought, smiling to himself. His feet pushed into the dust, he picked up a water bucket and headed off to the community well. Pranda skipped over to the school building where some of the other children hung out during the afternoon, even when school had finished. The school, after school, became a community centre where bored wives swapped yarns about what was happening amongst the bachelors of the town. And who was seeing who. Pranda tried to listen, but it really didn't interest her. She sat down next to one of the elders on the wooden bench at the front of the school. "You look like the devil," the man said to her. "What's the devil?" she asked the peaceful-looking father of 14. He was only joking, of course, but explained that the devil was the white man's way of scaring the shit out of their children, so they'd do the right thing. She thought about it, but to her it sounded odd and wondered if Trey believed in the devil. She also thought that nothing in life was more beautiful than living creatures. They made her smile with the way they went about their day-to-day activities. In the tree that stood several feet away from the school, she watched as a magpie collected worms and insects and took them back to her crying children. She told the old man that she loved animals more than humans because they did what was necessary and went about their daily business without harming others or fighting. She couldn't understand why humans were always at war, hurting each other for seemingly no reason. "You right," he said. "You right, and the world keeps turning, and men keep hurting." She smiled a sad smile. The old man rubbed Pranda's soft back hair, and they both continued to stare beyond what was under their noses. Chapter 4. Back at the offices of Recruit Salute, Trey was placed at the door of Lester Colford while they knocked. Trey noticed the mildly interested sign and giggled to himself. He asked if that was the name of the person in the office. Piers said no, that was his professional outlook. They entered at Lester's forced request as he was playing Xbox and eating Doritos and hadn't planned on a meeting, especially with Pimple Fest. Lester got up and went to the door. "What?" he said, just standing there, hovering over the 3 of them. Lester was a tall chap at 6 foot 5 inches. He had created Recruit Salute not because he loved people and dealing with fascist companies. not because he had vast experience in recruiting. On the contrary, he despised most people, thought them to be morons mainly, and he didn't have a clue about recruitment except that he'd noticed a hole that needed to be filled. Also, the fact that you didn't need qualifications or any license helped. He wasn't big on study or work for that matter. So the four of them stood there like lemmings, Lester trying desperately to get corn chip out of his teeth, his face blank and the usual look of annoyance on his face. George hovered. Pierce instigated the next move by clearing his throat. He asked if he minded if we helped the boy who happened to have a pretty shit day up to this point. Lester didn't care, said so and gave a half-hearted smile to the kid. Then they went to the area and joined the rest of the guys. At this stage they'd gathered together in what looked like a semi-meeting. Running up behind was the receptionist with the stool. She placed it behind the little tyke and helped him to sit. It wasn't comfortable and he was now starting to feel awkward. Trey was small for his age. He hadn't grown, or at least his spurt like some of the other kids at school. This had always made him feel different, as if he needed another reason to stand out. He kept to himself mostly, in class doing his work, doodling and playing games on his old Nokia. He had one friend, but she didn't know it. He talked about her all the time to his dad, how great she was, how she was smarter than everyone else, and how she smiled at him when others barely noticed he had a shadow. At recess, he'd go outside like everyone else and breathe the fresh air, as fresh as the air could get in Queens. The playground area was mainly asphalt and it had 2 basketball rings either ends and white painted lines to mark the court. There were several trees around the circumference of the court and benches that were parallel to the wide lines. He had his favourite spot to sit, although sometimes the bullies would come over and push him out of the way because they needed a place to deal phones. He sat on the stool with his knees together and hands on his legs, looking at all the adults. The one that was smoking and called him a gaylord, Pierce, was talking with a lady. He thought they may have forgotten he was there, so he called out to the rough-looking one, George. George looked around from the desk he was half perched on and said that they were trying to figure out what to do. Trey didn't care about what would happen next. He was sick of caring and he couldn't recall ever getting this much attention in his whole life. He looked down at the carpet and started to count the light brown squares for something to do. "Hey," George exclaimed, breaking his concentration. 1077, he said. "What?" George said. "Never mind." He lost interest. "We've decided what to do with you in the absence of you not having a clue. Seeing as none of us have anything to do really, because we're a recruiting company, well, to be honest," he said, "we don't really do anything except get in the way of people and jobs." George looked up and wondered. He'd never explained it to anyone before, especially a 10-year-old. It actually made sense that way. "So yes, I guess we're middlemen or the job mafia," he asked Trey if he knew what the mafia was, and Trey said that he'd seen them sometimes in Brooklyn when he went to visit his Auntie Carol. "They looked like that show," he said, but he couldn't remember the name. "Okay," said George. "We've decided if it's alright with you, since your crap day and all, with your dad kicking the bucket, that we'd like to help you contact your friend, sister, if that's alright with you," he said. "Oh, and what about your auntie?" "No, she left for Australia," Trey said. "I haven't seen her for 2 years now. She got remarried to some guy she'd met on the internet. So considering that you have no family and no friends and your parents are gone, we better go to your house and collect your shit." Pierce butted in because George was just too blunt for the little dude. Pierce explained to him that they would have to make a few calls and probably talk to the police. "No," Trey said. He didn't want them to call the police. Pierce asked if he was a drug dealer. Trey said he was not, but if he was interested in scoring, he knew a place could go. "No, it's okay," Pierce laughed, bent down and said, "Okay, tell me later." And then said out loud, that won't be necessary. I was just asking because you seem to be afraid of us calling the pigs." Trey began to cry. Man-woman Julie rocks up in her loincloth, seeing that she had the biggest Adam's apple and possibly the biggest balls. She would try and help. She got down on her knees and asked Trey if he was in trouble. He said no, but just that his dad never trusted the police and always said to avoid them. Julie got up, realigned her meagre-sized tissue-sized skirt and pulled the other two over to the side, leaving Trey to feel even more alone on the stool. So she said, looking Pierce in his forehead. You might be balding, but anyway, this is what's going to happen. She went on to explain to them that Pierce would take the secretary, George would go back to his desk and do some work for a change, and this. Plan. Take Trey back to his house and confirm that his dad was toast and get some of his things. They would then come back to the office where Trey would stay until they figured out where to put the half point. Pierce looked at George and then at Julie and said, yes, sir. George buggered off and Julie traipsed back to her cubicle. Being an accountant manager, they expected that she did have authority, although it was a grey area when it came to dead bodies, pimply kids and anything outside the orifice. They didn't have a better plan and it got Pierce out of work at least. So be it, he thought, shrugged his shoulders and ran his hand through his hair, now suspecting that he may be going bald. Bitch. Okay, that's it for this week, guys. So next week, part 6, starting from chapter 5. Thank you.